So our next segment, our next session is all about our journey towards becoming a reader. And this session is presented by Reg Klassen, Chief Superintendent, Frontier School Division. Reg has spent 30 plus years serving students in a variety of communities and educational situations, and currently he serves in his 8th year as the Chief Superintendent of the Frontier School Division. Reg brings with him a comprehensive understanding of education as it relates to leadership, administration, staffing, curriculum, and community. Reg is a well-respected educator, leader, and visionary with a wealth of knowledge and experience in providing quality educational programs for diverse students in a variety of settings. In 2021, a partnership was formed between Frontier School Division and the Learning Bar. The goal was to support Frontier in increasing the reading achievement of children in grades K to 3 by 10%. At the end of the 2021 school year, this was surpassed with participating schools achieving 25%. Reg will be sharing their results, their challenges, lessons learned, and the steps that they have taken to support the successful outcomes for students and staff. Please extend a warm welcome to Reg.
Good morning and welcome. Some of that introduction wasn't true. Knowledgeable about education, not sure about that. I just work in education every day and try to do a good job. And I realized how old I am when one of my graduates from the mid-90s shows up at one of these pieces and says, "Do you remember me?" And I remember you, Marie. I'm going to tell you a story today. So you're going to have a video of about 9 minutes, but that's it. I don't have a fancy pants PowerPoint. Some things have happened in my personal life as of late that just didn't give me the time to do that. So what I thought I would do is, and yesterday at the BSIP conference that we also co-hosted with Indigenous Directorate of Manitoba, I got these and started to write down the notes and the things I wanted to say to you, and then I went home and I shuffled the cards and put numbers on them, and that's the story. A little bit about our school division. Frontier School Division was created in 1965 by the then conservative government because there were only 2 graduates out of the north, high school graduates, and they said we need more. So when Frontier School Division was created, we took over a number of provincial schools, but we also took over day schools. So Grand Rapids, which is with Misapewistic Cree Nation, Norway House, Barons, to say a few. Here's the irony, is all of those schools were built on provincial land, and the students from the First Nation close by went to those schools. Then what happened as we build new schools, those schools are left, and we build the school on First Nation. So the schools now in Norway House are built on, at least the big new one is built on First Nation. And now that we're talking with Misapewistic Cree Nation in Grand Rapids, the town of, we're talking about a K to 6 on Misapewistic Cree Nation land. And so that's the journey that we've been on. I get into my office on a weekly basis from a lawyer, somebody looking for proof that they were attending one of our day schools. Because when we took over some of those schools were still run by the nuns, etc. And there's still in the day schools some of the abuse stories that came out. So, then of course we continued to add school. At some point the province said you can have Snow Lake, we've got Churchill, we've got Brochet, which is a fly-in community. We've got schools up and down the Bay Line. If you take the train to Churchill and stop in Thicket Portage or Piquotanay, you can see the school. It's right behind the little shack that serves as a train station. The other thing that we have to do in our school division is, like everybody else, find teachers. Currently, we are short 21 teachers. In August, I told the Minister of Education, I'm looking for 46 teachers. So we've been able to fill up about 25 of those spots. We've been 20 teachers short all year long, and I won't even get into the number of clinicians we're short. And I've got 26 limited teaching permits. And when we don't, somebody was telling me they were short on substitutes. I don't even know what a substitute looks like. We have a few communities that have a sub, one or two. And so when somebody's away, and which now we have much awayness because of pandemic, and if you sneeze, you get an excuse to stay home. I shouldn't say it like that. We want to be safe, but you know, if you're not really sick, my theory now is put on an N95 and come to work. I refuse to test. I'm not testing anymore. I'm done with that. I'm moving on. I'm wearing a mask. Sorry, I'll get a mask on right away. So, anyways, it's just the story of where we are, and we have so many EAs that are in the classroom, untrained, trying to manage kids, and not a lot of learning is going on because they're not trained to do the learning, and even if there's a good lesson plan, it doesn't work. So in the midst of all of that, we needed to do something. So as a division, we've got divided up. We cover 485,000 square kilometers. We start at the Ontario border, at the U.S. border, and go up along the Ontario border. We include Falcon Beach, and then we cut across west north of Hecla. We stay north of Dauphin. We stay north of Swan River, and then when we bump into the Saskatchewan border, we just go north until we hit the territories. Then we stop. And the only part of that that isn't ours is Mystery Lake and Thompson and Flin Flon and Kelsey, which is the Paw. We have a huge infrastructure. We've got hundreds of buses on the road. I always laugh when schools get closed here because Churchill does not think about shutting down school until we have a wind chill of -50. More dangerous than the wind chill is polar bears. So we have a fence, a nice chain link fence around our playground because we don't want small children to be taken away by the white things. It's a different world. We have 5 areas. We're divided into 5 areas. Each area has an area superintendent, a literacy coach, a math coach. We try to hire a school psychologist for each area. And our division office is in Winnipeg because all planes, trains, and automobiles in Manitoba go in and out of Winnipeg. And so I fly a lot to Flin Flon or to Churchill, or I'll get a whole bunch of people together and we charter a flight and we head off to wherever it is we're going. That's kind of my travel as I get to see schools, etc. So there's lots of movement. We have a huge fleet of vehicles, I should say, and that's become super expensive. So the costs have risen. Like leasing a vehicle now is horrendous, and so the infrastructure costs to what we're trying to do is significant. And I might add that the government, in its wisdom, decided to give our school division a 2% increase. There is no one else in the province that got a 2% increase. So the smallest increase goes to the poorest communities. Now, part of that is because 65% of our budget is based on federal students, which comes from the federal government, and only 35% of our budget is based on provincial kids and comes from the provincial government. And the federal communities are growing. The provincial communities are shrinking. They've all lost their industry. The houses are worn down. If you go to Lynn Lake, a community of one time 5,000 people, it's now 600. The school used to have 1,000 kids. We're now a little bit over 100, 170, something like that. And you'll see house after house after house that's boarded up. And that's community after community in our province. In Peonin Point, we have 2 students. In Piquitane, I think we have 7. So the cost of providing an education for these children that is equitable to what the new schools in Fort Garry are going to be able to provide is significant. And so part of what we scramble with, part of what we try to deal with, is the unwritten, unsaid things that come out of how we treat Indigenous people. Over 150 years, it is still alive and doing well. And that's a tragedy. Because my kids can't read. My kids can't read. And that makes me stay awake at night, and it makes me angry every time I say it. So that's our school division. And so I want to ask, I have some quotes, and why is literacy so important? And I've made it number 1 in our school division. Even if nobody else believes me, I've made it number 1. That's what we're going to do, come hell or high water. We're going to teach our kids to read. Literacy is the foundation upon which we learn and grow. Building literacy skills in children is one of the most effective ways to ensure they can achieve their full potential in school and throughout life. Can't imagine anybody in here is going to disagree. Literacy opens doors to understanding, empathy, critical thinking, and the capacity for lifelong learning. Now, so many of my kids come from trauma. And so they're going to need some empathy, and they're going to need critical thinking, and they're going to need to continually learn as they pull themselves out of the state from which they came. Poor literacy is strongly correlated with poor life outcomes. This is one of the ones my favorite. Literacy is the bridge from misery to hope. Kofi Annan. From misery. Not just be successful, from misery to hope. Once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Frederick Douglass. Reading is power. And here's Shakespeare. A beggar's book outworths a noble's blood. Whenever you read a good book, somewhere in the world, the door opens to allow more light. Vera Nazarian. And of course, the one that we've all read at some point, the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more you learn, the more places you will go. That's Dr. Seuss. So for me, as we tried to figure out what we were doing, as I tried to figure out what my role was as chief superintendent, and I will say I was chosen to do this job in January, and then I had from then until August to think about it. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and go, what the hell are you thinking? Like, you said yes to this. Like, what do you know about the North? What do you know about this school division? It's pretty darn big. You're not the superintendent. Now they put another title in front of it, the chief superintendent. What does that mean? And so it kind of unnerved me to think that I was picked. I'm still not quite sure why, but I'll tell you a story. A long, long time ago, I know my face hides it, but a long, long time ago, my mom put better clothes on me, and this yellow thing, it was just a little travelall, showed up in the farmyard, and I got on. And my German shepherd sat there looking at me, where are you going? Like, we got things to do. Because up until then, I had freedom on the farm. I was 5. My mom had 3 other kids. I could do what I wanted, and my German Shepherd was my protector. I could go chase the cows in the pasture. I could go to the garden and pick the peas and put them in my pocket and climb up into the top of the hay bales and sit there and eat peas with my German Shepherd, Rip. So the bus came and took me to school. My God, I hated it. It was the worst experience of my life, and I would sit there day after day after day, hour after hour, waiting for the bell. And then when I got to when I learned how to tell time, then it got even worse, because then I knew how long I had to stay. And I disliked it, couldn't stand it, did nothing, and got into all kinds of trouble with 3 other guys. And and then in grade 2, the same thing happened. Same guys got into trouble, and I never got strapped. They did. I knew how to say sorry at the right time. And if you say sorry to the principal and cry, you can usually get a warning. And that worked. So they decided that the best thing for me would be to repeat grade 2. That's what you did in those days. Kid wasn't learning, you have them do it all over again, because now they're really going to catch on. The only thing I caught on to was that there was a baseline that you had to achieve, and that was a 5-0, and you needed to do enough, and that's the way I went through the rest of school. School was a little better because I got involved in sports, and in high school there were sports and there were girls, so that was all good. There's, classes were lousy, and assignments and tests. But my graduating year I was very calculating. All my marks were in the 50s except 2. I excelled. I got 60s. In school, I realized later in life I didn't know this, but my daughter, who's a school psychologist, my wife, who has just retired from being a resource teacher, and my daughter-in-law, who's a clinical psychologist, and you would think that I'd be fixed by now, have often said to me, Dad, maybe you should take a little Ritalin, because I'm ADHD. And I've refused and I've survived, but it's been difficult. And sometimes I wonder, what would that be like to focus for an entire morning on something? What a pleasure. Because that doesn't happen to me. So there I was in school, not sure what I was going to do, and so I decided to go to voluntary service, and I was going to save the world. I went to Ontario, and I worked with delinquent boys in a whole bunch of homes. Here I was, this really good kid, and I was going to save the world, and all I ended up doing was getting an education. I learned that 12 and 13-year-old boys, to use a ghetto blaster from another person, could repay with a sexual favor. That was pretty new to me, the little farm kid from Saskatchewan. And so I thought maybe I should go to school. So I thought that I would go to, Bible school. I didn't think I was smart enough for university, so I'll go to Bible school. And I chose Canadian Mennonite Bible College, which is now Canadian Mennonite University. What I didn't know was that over half of their courses were cross-registered with the University of Manitoba. And what I didn't know is that some of those professors there had been invited by Harvard and some of the highest standing universities in theology, and they had chosen not to go because they wanted to work with those kids from across the country that were Mennonites and wanted to come here to study. So I was way in over my head, but I survived. I got a Bachelor of Education after that. So what do you do with a Bachelor of Theology and a Bachelor of Education? Well, I worked a little bit, and then I went back to school and got a Bachelor of Education, and Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Theology, Bachelor of Arts, and then I got a Bachelor of Education, and then I got a job. So when I look back at that story, I really, really question how I survived. I knew my parents wouldn't let me quit school, but by golly, if I had had a chance, I think I would have been out, because it just wasn't fun. But what I do remember is being able to read. What I do remember in grade 2 and grade 3, I was looking for all the books in our tiny little library that were in the same kind of vein as My Friend Flicka, Call of the Wild, and my favorite time was when the new book order would come and you could order books. And my mom always gave me a couple of bucks to order some books. And I read. Not fast, very ploddingly slow, but I read. And when I look back at that, that probably saved a whole lot of my life. Nobody thought that when I graduated, I would be a chief superintendent. Not even my parents, who had high hopes for me. So when I look back at that, I think my journey, being able to read, and I sometimes think, how did I learn? Well, it was Dick and Jane. And I don't know what the teacher was doing at the time, but I had a pretty good teacher in grade 2, second year, and grade 3, the first year. And that's where it kind of took off. And so when I think about our kids, at the very least, I want them to be able to read. So when I came to Frontier School Division, I met with literacy coaches, and I met with the board, and I remember at a meeting with literacy coaches looking at literacy numbers, the data, and saying, wow, what is this like? And a literacy coach said to me, well, it hasn't changed since I've been here. My question was, how long have you been here? The answer was 17 years. Well, what the hell? These are bad scores. They suck. And we're sitting here, well, they haven't changed. And it didn't matter what we tried to do, nothing worked. And so I got an assistant superintendent position of academics and instruction to drive some of that agenda. And then at a meeting with the senior admin, our superintendents, we have 5 area superintendents and 4 assistant superintendents. It sounds overwhelming, but we could just as easily have called them coordinators or something else, okay? It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. We met with them and the trustees, and we looked at the data, and I had a trustee who's been with us for over 30 years. I've got some long-standing trustees. And she went like this, and I remember this. We've seen this before. Something's got to change. Something has to change because these marks aren't doing it. So what to do? I remember meeting with Doug and his team and myself and a number of our superintendents in January. That was the January right before the March where everything went, uh-oh, pandemic's here, let's shut down. That's where it happened. And the only good thing that came out of the pandemic, really, for us was that we had to ramp up our internet capacity. And, of course, Elon Musk is supposed to send us shares because our internet has gone from $300,000 a year to about $800,000 a year. We're close to $1 million on internet connectivity in our school division because we bought the satellites. Actually, the amount of money we're paying for megabit per megabit is actually less, even though we've more than doubled our cost because of how much internet. So that kind of saved it. And I will say that that opened the door for what I'm about to tell you in terms of our meetings and our work with the Learning Bar. So we met, and because of the pandemic, we went back and forth. We had lots of conversation. The pandemic left us all unsure. What was that going to mean for us? And of course, we negotiated price. It costs money to hire people to work with your people in terms of literacy. And so we negotiated price, and we went back and forth on those things. And I had numerous conversations with the assistant superintendent of the time, which was Thelma, about how does this work? Are you sure about this? Like, how do we go about this? And we had done 2 years of EYE in Area 4, and the superintendent there, Darren Kinden, was ready. He said, look, EYE is a game changer. It works for us, like, and it was amazing how the data from that, once it came back to us, how that changed teaching practice. So we thought, okay, this is the same company, these are the same people, and he was ready. He was ready. And then, of course, the Learning Bar threw in the last bit of information. We guarantee a 10% increase. Well, we hadn't seen a 10% increase in 30 years. Why not go for that? They guaranteed it. You did. So 10% increase. We'd never had that kind of increase. And we've had that kind of increase in a classroom here or there, but never across an area, particularly across the division. And so that was a pretty big deal. So we took the plunge. We said, okay, we're in. All of Area 4 schools are going to do it. We had initially talked about a K-8. We narrowed it down to grades 1 to 3. We talked about all of Area 4 schools, and then we included, we got a request from Area 3, so they included Black River and Barrens, and then we had a request from Area 1, so we threw in Cross Lake into that. And then at the last minute, a little bit late, because Grand Rapids had already been on a program with the Learning Bar, we added Grand Rapids to that. So those are the schools that did our first year. And we took off. So in April and May, the Learning Bar met with our teachers who were involved in it. They met with our principals, trying to set the stage. Now, setting the stage for something that you're telling teachers that they have to do is not an easy bit of business. Okay, this is how you're going to, this is what you have to do, this is what you're going to have to learn, and this is what we're going to go forward with. And that wasn't easy, and so we did that preliminary kind of meeting and getting ready for September, so it wasn't new, so people kind of knew what they had to do. So I want to show you a video. It's about 9 minutes. It's just me talking, so I'm sorry for that. You'll see how hard I'm thinking by the time, many times my eyes flick up to the top right-hand corner, right? That's how people tell when they're interviewing somebody or interrogating somebody that they might be telling the truth or they're telling a lie, right? There's all those signals. And you'll notice if you can read my hands, then you'll really get a depth of understanding, okay? But I sat down in the Learning Bar office this summer because we were close by based on a conference that I had attended, and I had did an interview for the Learning Bar, and also online there's some other stuff. But here on YouTube, if you type in the Learning Bar, there's me answering a whole bunch of questions, and I think it'll be helpful for you to hear that, and then I'll carry on with the story and some of the other things that we did as a school division. So can you run that? Oh, there he is. Okay.
In 2020, the Frontier School Division in Manitoba was using the Our School School Climate Survey. In 2021, the division adopted the Early Years Evaluation and Confident Learners Literacy Program as part of an educational prosperity program.
The reason we were motivated to get involved in, how can I say it, a more robust reading strategy was because our students couldn't read by the end of grade 3 at a grade 3 level. And that was kind of our target. We want our students to read at the end of grade 3 at a grade 3 level, because we really kind of believe in learning to read leads you to reading to learn. 92% of our students were in the emerging level in grade 1, 2, and 3 of the schools that were in the Educational Prosperity Program. The results we've seen this year in our students with the schools that are in our program with the Learning Bar is an overall increase well beyond our expectations. We had set 10%, that was kind of the brand promise, and our overall average was I think around 25%. And some schools have gone beyond that. We know that some schools have struggled a little bit for a variety of reasons, and ours aren't as high as the 25%, but the overall, that's where the average is. So we're pretty excited by that. We're really excited by that. At our school committee conference this year, when that data came up on the screen, that we had moved from 92% in the emerging level to, I think at that time we were, I think we were 71. We'd moved 20%. School committee conference is all of our school committee members from across our division. We have 42 schools, and every school has a school committee, and they work closely with the principal. There was applause. So it was a pretty fine moment. What it's created is a belief. A belief in what we're doing is going to pay off. And that's key, because in education, we have this system that kind of is part of the culture. If I wait long enough, this too shall pass. Even if everything was to walk away, the skills that have been learned by our teachers through the intense PLCs and PD stay with them. After we got through that kind of pushback, that kind of, boy, this is a lot of work, do we have to meet every week? Then what happened is we found a whole new level of buy-in someplace around January, February. And the other thing that occurred was wherever we had strong literacy leads in those programs, the collaboration went off the charts. And I would have superintendents come back and who had participated in a PLC and kind of be, well, I'll say it this way, over the moon in terms of the conversation that they were hearing, which was a significantly different conversation. The conversation much more focused on student learning and strategies for student learning than they were at the beginning of the year. When we think about day-to-day tasks and the impact our work with the Learning Bar has had on leadership in the school, we've moved, for those administrators who were a part of the program, we've moved from a managerial to more of thinking around instructional leadership. The elements that were really important in the program, I would say, is probably, there's, I think, three that stand out. The first one would be the making sure that our teachers went online and read and looked at what they needed to be looking at online. And the way in which we did that was tracking their minutes. And it was very clear that some of our literacy leads had already spent 800-900 minutes looking at the information that was online, and those were the schools that were flourishing. So there was a direct correlation between time spent there and success in classroom or success in schools. So we reminded, I can't tell you how many times I would talk to principals, and I mean superintendents, area superintendent, and say, here's what I noticed, because I had access to that, and I'd go on, here's what I noticed, so-and-so is way down in minutes, and so I need you to find out what's going on there with that principal, because we're not getting kind of the results that we expect to get. The other thing that made a huge difference was, even though I was asked on a couple of occasions to do the PLCs once every 2 weeks, I said no. And I was just a mean person by saying that they had to meet every single week. And that was with a Learning Bar person, and that paid off. That created a kind of momentum so that you couldn't forget every 2 weeks, or could choose not to do it for a week and then suddenly have to do it and come back and report. You had a week, often 2 or 3, maybe as many as 5 days, in your classroom to do the things that you had talked about at that PLC, and then you had a chance to report, and there is the exchange, and the principals had to be a part of that, and a lot of my area superintendents were a part of that. So those PLCs were significant. The other piece, and the third thing that I would say probably brought about, and I don't know if this is the greatest, where the biggest success was, but the leadership component. Without that, I think this would have been a failure. I think that when we said to our area superintendents, and we said to our assistant superintendent who's in charge of academics and our principals, that this is mandatory that you're in, and that we're going to do this as a leadership group along with our teachers, and I think that was significant. And then the exploration that we did, the conversation we had with those leaders about what it takes to be the leader, and how do you now help teachers overcome the obstacles, or how do you, as a leader of a school, recognize what the obstacles are that your teachers in grade 1, 2, and 3 in this case are facing, and how do we move that? I knew the other work that the Learning Bar had done, and I knew the work that Dr. Wilms had done. So I trusted that, because I knew that that was based in research and it was sound. I spent a lot of time with my assistant superintendent who's in charge of academics, and they were spending a lot of time on literacy and numeracy, and so we talked an awful lot about this. Our greatest fear was that we would throw out everything we had been trying to do till that point, because this would come in. And so when we found a way of thinking that we could balance that, and I think we have, I don't think we're good at it yet, but I think we're working at that. When I said to the Learning Bar, but I'm not throwing out, it's got to work, it's got to support. And so we started K to 12, 1 to 8, and then we narrowed it down to 1 to 3. And we did some pilots. And the other thing that we did, I think was really wise, was we used an area 4, which had already done the EYE, and that was success. So that's how it was. But the truth is, I trusted the partners. I believed in their program, but I wasn't sure. I simply spoke to everybody that listened to me that this was going to be great for us. So I have a colleague that continues to tell me, you fake it until you make it. And that last part was a little bit of that. I told everybody that was willing to listen in our school division, this will be great. But I wasn't sure, because it was brand new. And you're counting on people. And throughout the year, that first year, we constantly realigned with the Learning Bar. Like, we did all kinds of juggling and shifting, and are we meeting enough? Okay, what's going on here? Assessment in terms of the conversations, and are we progressing? And so that happened a great deal. I once got challenged by a university professor for saying, you learn to read so that you can read to learn. And he said, you're reading to learn all the time. Yeah, Mr. Tall Forehead. But if you can't read at a grade 3 level by the end of grade 3, you're kind of going to get stuck. And so that's what we said. Every kid needs to know how to read at a grade 3 level by the time they leave our grade 3 classroom. And what we found, what I said in all kinds of leaders in our school division emerged over the year. We had a literacy lead that actually led her school, and the school just vaulted. I mean, I know I talk about 92% in the emerging level, and then we move all those 20% out, but their school, I think, went from 92% in the emerging level and got right down to the low 60s in the emerging level. So they moved over 30% of those kids that were there out, simply because of her leadership, because of her understanding, because of her work online in the modules that they have to go through, and did a fabulous job. The other thing with our principals needed to be a part. We expect our principals to participate in PLCs, and I had a lot of area superintendents that participated in PLCs, and I've participated in some PLCs. And so everybody needs to be present. And so one of the most difficult things that's happened is that my schedule, being that it is, the learning bar takes precedent, and I will move things around to participate in the leadership meetings. I'm trying really hard to be a role model, and it's not enough for me to say, oh, I'm so important that my stuff takes precedent. That doesn't work. If this is a priority, if I'm verbalizing it, then I have to act it, and I got to be there. And I've missed some, and the guilt is high, and so I'm trying not to miss any. But I think by my presence, and then the presence of our other senior administrators, and then by the presence of principals, it adds a whole depth of importance to what we're trying to do for our teachers. The other thing that we found in this thing with principals is that I was a principal. I've had 15 years of being a principal. But never before, never have I known what to look for in a classroom as clearly as our principals who have been a part of the Learning Bar and gone through that program. Like, they know what they have to see in that classroom, and if they don't see it, they're expected to ask why they don't see it. And they're expected to have conversations with those teachers. And you'll see later on in the data how the para data substantiates that, and how we can go to that data and then ask questions with those individual teachers on this individual student who hasn't been tested in a long time. So that's also really important. And those were key pieces that we didn't have before that. So when you track minutes on teachers that are doing online learning in order to prepare their lessons and bring that into the classroom, and when you say to the leadership that this is mandatory, this is not a conversation, this is not an option. We had one principal who really didn't like it because their school is pretty stable. They're one of the few stable communities we have, and their school has got teachers that have been there for a while, so it's hard. You know those teachers that have been there for a while, they just want to go on with their same old worksheets that they've duplicated for 36, well, maybe 22 years. Anyways, he finally bought in. And the clouds disappeared and the sun came out. Because he said, okay, if I've got to do this, here's how we're going to do it. And he sat down with his teachers and he charted stuff out and he said, okay, here we go. And the school went. So the significant piece, the most significant piece that happened here with the Learning Bar is that we added a leadership component. It takes a great deal more time, but we put the principals in and the superintendents in, and that's made all the difference. That's made all the difference. I said to the Learning Bar, look, we're into Fontes and Pinnell. You may agree or disagree with that, but that's what we're using. And I'm not throwing that out because you're coming on board. So now we know that there's a direct correlation between the success in the para outcomes in terms of what we're doing with the Learning Bar. We know that the more successful those kids are, we know that there's, when we do a Fontes and Pinnell, we know that that Fontes and Pinnell shows the difference. It shows the growth very clearly. And our Fontes and Pinnell is set up so that it can be translated into our power school so that it's easy for report cards. And we've done a great deal of work on that, and that's another story for another day. But that's how it works. And it's working well. And so I think that it's important that you know that. Yeah, I wasn't sure. That last comment, I wasn't sure. I was scared out of my mind. Like we're spending money on this. We're hiring a lot of people from far away, and we're going to do a lot of this online. And it works. It works better than we expected. And we exceeded every target that we had. And that was pretty exciting. Again, you know, that whole notion of fake it until you make it. Well, for a while I felt like I was. We have monthly leadership meetings, which involves our superintendents and learning bar personnel. And then what we did was we bumped into Fullen's famous implementation dip. If you've read any of his work, September, October is pretty good, but by the end of October, we knew that something wasn't working as it should. We were in November, and we were struggling, and things weren't moving like they should. And so what we did with the Learning Bar is that we met every Friday morning with the senior administration that had a school in this program at 8 a.m. online for anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes every second week. And that was to address the implementation dip, i.e. the slowdown, i.e. the fact that we were falling off the rails. And so we talked about things like which principal needs support, where do we need to send more time, what's happening in the school, what's the attitude, how do you deal with that? Because things grow in schools, attitudes grow in schools, and so we needed to address those things because this is hard work. The other thing we were getting at that first year was lots of people complaining about professional development and too much professional development. So in our second year, we said, if you're in the Learning Bar, you don't do any other professional development. That's it. That's all you're doing. Okay? And I know then, of course, MTS will say, well, you know, I have my own rights as a teacher to do my own. Fine, but don't let it interfere with what we're doing. We're just not going to go down that road. And I would always come back to them and say, your kids can't read at the level they're supposed to, so quit arguing with me. And so many times I wasn't liked, but now that we had some success and we knew we were on the right track, we were going to run with it. So we did those. Every 2 weeks we would meet. We've done it again this year. It turns out that the implementation dip is here again. So in the second year, we had Area 4. We added all of Area 5, which is our biggest area, which is Norway House. I mean, they're growing like gangbusters. I think we got 1,600 students there or something like that in 2 schools. So the walls are falling over. So we added them, and we added 3 more schools. We added our frontier version of Bermuda Triangle, which is South Indian Lake, Leaf Rapids, and Lynn Lake. So if you look at the map, that's our Bermuda Triangle. You can, in winter, or even in summer, disappear up there. So be careful. Particularly if you get off the bad highway. So anyways, we added those schools. And so again, we had the same thing happen to us. It stalled. It seemed not to go. And so what we did was, we're meeting again every 2 weeks with a senior admin that's a part of the journey. And what are the problems? What are the issues? What do we need to address? What do we need to solve? And so that's the work. I will say this, for those of you that want to jump in on this, you got to be committed. If you leave it up to your teachers, it will not get done. You have to drive it. You have to drive it, and I have felt often like I am an ogre on my stand because there's many reasons why not to do it. And yet when I see the numbers of our kids, I'm pretty excited. We did the assessment this year in 22-23, and I thought that, wow, we're not going to be at 92% in the emerging because we've had kids in this for a year. It turned out we had 90% kids in the emerging. It hadn't changed. So then what we did was we pulled out all those grade 2s and all those grade 3s that had been in grade 1 and grade 2, and we tried to determine which kids had been in school last year and which kids hadn't, because that was also a piece to this. And then we saw that we actually had made some gains. The kids that had been regular in the program had made gains, and so that was comforting. I needed that to forge ahead. And I know that I'm getting close to the end of my time, but there was a time where I thought our teachers didn't care. There was a time where I thought our teachers maybe were lazy, because I was pretty frustrated with what was going on. And it's hard to teach in communities where it's remote and isolated, and you better buy a truckload of toilet paper because you don't know when you're getting to the big city next time. Those are the things that our teachers face, and they're living in our houses, which aren't state-of-the-art. We're doing our best, but we have 350 houses we have to look after, and the government gives us $750,000 a year, so that means that based on that, each house, I think, is supposed to last over 300 years. So that's our goal, 300, sorry. Anyways, so it's not easy for teachers out there. And if you don't get your internet hooked up, if you're a brand new teacher and you don't get your internet hooked up from September until December because that's the next time that the person's coming out to hook it up, that's also a problem. So those are the things that we take for granted here that are way not for granted out there. But our teachers weren't without caring, and they weren't lazy. What our teachers were, they didn't have enough tools in the toolbox. And they do care passionately about their kids, but they had very little to work on. And when you're a teacher in a school of 3 teachers and you're the only K-4 teacher, there's not a lot of people down the hall to talk to. And so this has opened up this door. It's another set of tools in that toolbox, which is invigorating teachers and which is getting them excited when they see the student's success. And they don't have to turn to pushing the button on the photocopier and doing the same handouts that they've done before because they don't have any alternatives. And that's been a big thing in our school division. And part of that's driven by our principals talking to our teachers about what's going on in the classroom, those kinds of things. So they did have I know you'll hear Dr. Wilm say this, they did have, we often say we need to give them pressure and support, gentle pressure. People remind me that I have to give gentle pressure and support. But the pressure and support helps them find their capacity and their will. And if you have capacity and will with pressure and support, great things will happen. I've talked about a lot of the key ingredients already to being successful, and so I won't go over that again. But key ingredients for going forward. We are trying hard to roll this out across our entire division. Every grade 1, 2, and 3, and we're looking to include kindergarten across our entire division. Now that we're out of the pandemic, what we have going on in our school division as of this coming week, right? It starts next week, boots on the ground. We've got boots on the ground. We haven't had that with the Learning Bar until now. So people have met online for an hour with their group of teachers and continue to advance them along. And so now what's happening is we've got Learning Bar coming in to some of our schools that we would say maybe are, compared to others, languishing. They're going to come in and they're going to walk alongside our teachers in our schools and see what that does. Be firsthand, be side by side with them. And so we're pretty excited about what that means and the growth that that should bring about. We look forward to that, and that's new for us. That's another new piece. So going forward, that's what we would build into the program for next year, that maybe they would even come sooner than sometime in the coldest week of February. The other thing is that we need to do is that I'm tired of that we have more IEPs in grade 2 and we have more IEPs in grade 3 than we had in grade 2, and it goes on and on and on. Good God Almighty. That just speaks to me as an absolute failure. Just an absolute failure. And so what we've noticed is that in some schools where this is going gangbusters, our attendance has improved with students. We've had a surge in attendance. And I think some of the data, although it's a little rough, would indicate that some teachers, because of the greater success, find it a little easier to get to school because we have an attendance issue with students and with staff. So that's one thing that's happening. And that's worth everything. I am tired of the increase in IEPs. I want them to become less. And I really believe that IEPs can become less when kids know how to read at a high level, and I think that behavior will also become less when kids know how to read and have a greater amount of success at school. We spend an inordinate amount of time working on IEPs. I know this. My wife was a resource teacher for many years. And testing kids and doing all these things and building programs so that they can spend the day with an EA. Well, don't get me started on that fiasco. We have great EAs. They love our kids. But every time there's an issue in a classroom, I get a principal says, we need more EAs. What? Really? You know how many EAs I could hire if I fired all the teachers and just hired EAs? Like we have to think differently. We have resource money to help our kids in greatest need. Is an EA the best way? Now, I know we can't find people, and we'd all like to find more people, and that's a challenge. But I think we really need to think about that. And I really believe that what we're doing with our literacy is going to change that. It's going to shift that. And it's going to move it to a different place. And the place that I'm dreaming about is less IEPs and less behavior intervention plans and more success at school. I don't want to have conversations with my middle years principals and teachers and coaches about reading interventions in middle years. Certainly not at the number that we currently have. And I don't want to sit at the table in front of a chief and council and have the chief say to me, you said that our kids would be ready for post-secondary, and they had to come back and take upgrade courses. Upgrade their courses so that they found success at university. So what am I to say? I have an education agreement with them. We have 16 of those education agreements. And when those kids leave our school, they're supposed to be ready. So this, in part, is to change that dialogue. And you saw the numbers that Dr. Wilms put up. 2.4 to 3% less likely to be successful in, I took a picture of the slide. So we've got work to do, and we really believe that this is part of the work that we need to do. So, can't read the cards anyways, I scribbled them. This is important work, and it's been exciting, and it's been actually a little bit stressful and painful. I'm looking for the money for next year. Because I really believe in this, as do many of our people, does our board, because one of the things we've done is include our board in some of the celebrations we've had. And we now can report to them an increase in our reading, better scores, kids are learning, and that's exciting for a school division. In a school division which is rampant with poverty, which is rampant with trauma, which is rampant with school having been for all of those generations that have gone before, those who need to come to school, it hasn't been a good thing. And here we are, doing this program, finding success. Thank you.